I'm going to create a cylinder. Okay. It has by 32, I think. Yeah, 32 vertices. So this is basically whenever you create a new object, all right, and you didn't do anything yet, their initial parameter is open. Okay, their data basically is open. All right, where's my data? Ah, there we go. Okay, so everything will be here. All right, and then you can change this to something substantial, 64. So you can see there's more lines, or go back to 32, or 16, or whatever you want, and then you can change the parameter here as well. Okay, but after you manipulate this, let's say you move it a bit, you lose this. So this is only available on creation. Just remember that, okay? Because as soon as I move this, it's gone. You see it? It's now move. Okay? All right, so that's initial. All right, so let's say we've talked about multiple stuff before on the tools that you can create, how to make this thing look like whatever it's supposed to be. Okay, so pipes and whatnot, making them translucent. It's a little tricky. We do have a video that I can share with you guys on YouTube, how to make glass using Eevee. Okay, so before we kind of manipulate this, let me just duplicate it and move one on the side over there so we can just recreate that. Okay, and then I will now adjust this one right here. I'm going to extrude and scale it. So our typical Super Mario kind of pipe. Press I to inset faces. All right, so there's our, no need to know it's a bottomless pit, okay? It's Super Mario, even if it's in 3D, that's all you're gonna see right there, okay? So what I'll do also is I wanna smooth shade this. However, we get this artifact kind of stuff, you see it? So it's trying to smooth the sharp edge, and we're getting some kind of artifact from it. So the way to fix this is I'm going to go to the data tab. Okay, I'm going to go to normals. I'm going to turn on auto smooth at 30°, which is the default. As soon as I turn that, you get best of both worlds basically. Okay, this is shade flat. Now that we turn on auto smooth, okay, there you go. So all right, so we'll give it a quick material. We're gonna, I don't know the Super Mario green, I'm guessing kind of dark green. Maybe something like that. Okay, close enough. Okay, so now let's talk about our render engine. Okay, so when you start Blender and you pick the fourth sphere right here, first is wireframe, solid, and then preview mode or look dev, all right? And then finally the render, okay? The render here is basically what you see is what you get. The performance of your computer, however, tells you that, hey, just because what you see is what you get, you're gonna get a pleasant experience, all right? Depending on your computer, depending on the GPU and CPU, okay? So this is basically, if I click on my camera right now, I'm going to press 0 on the numpad. I'm going to press N and then lock my camera to view so I can manipulate my camera here as if I'm manipulating the work camera. Okay, I'm going to press N again to get rid of that. I'm going to do render image, just to show you the one-to-one of what you're seeing and what's going to be rendered. Okay. Keep that in mind. That's how you get your render. By the way, this is what you'll need to do when you submit your stuff next week. Okay, you click on render image, and then you simply go here, image, and you can save as a PNG. Okay, so you can save this image because once you close that, you lose that. Okay, we're also going to teach you guys how to set up your output right here. Okay. All right, so this is what we're seeing right now. So this is one-to-one. I'm going to get out of camera mode, pressing 0 on the numpad. All right, and let's talk about Eevee. first is the first tab. It looks like a DSLR or an SLR back camera. You see it right here? So this is your first tab, okay? And the render engine right now is called Eevee. I can switch this to cycles, all right? So let's explain what is the difference between Eevee and cycles. We do have Workbench. Workbench is the engine that you should be using when you're using the computers here. Okay, so Workbench is like no frills. Okay, it is strictly for working. It'll give you the performance minus the look. Okay, what you see here is not what you get. This is basically a workspace. Okay, so the other one again is Eevee. Eevee is real time. Think of video game rendering. Okay. So whatever it is you do on a lighting here, it's real time. What you see is what you get. Okay, almost. Okay, and then we have cycles. Cycles, this is realistic render of Blender. Okay, it has global illumination, or what they call GI. It simply means it can bounce light. Okay, so if I were to create here a plane to act as a floor, okay, and keep in mind we can kind of do global illumination on Eevee as an add-on. Someone wrote the add-on just for 2.9, so you can kind of do cycles in Eevee. Okay, you can kind of do global illumination. All right, so here's the difference here. Remember, this is our realistic render cycles, right? You see what's happening? We're getting some realistic kind of light spill of the green. You see it right here? Okay, and look how this object is bouncing back light to the bottom of that one right there. You see it? Technically, we're not supposed to if there's no light bounce because our light is over here, right? Yeah. So to show you that, I'm going to hide this plane. All right, see how that light disappeared? Because that's being bounced, right? Now, this is cycles. This is the realistic one. Now, let's go to Eevee. All right. It's not bad. I mean, you see it, but you can tell there's no gradient on the light. It's either it's lit somehow or not lit, okay? The fact that you're seeing this is not because the light is bouncing. It's because the world lighting in Blender is not set to black, okay? So this is your world tab right here, okay? It says background color. Color is, look, it's gray. So if I lower this down in Eevee, this is reality actually. All right, this is what it's supposed to be. There's no bounce light at all in Eevee. So what you're seeing is what you call ambient lighting. It has that washout look though. You can tell if I increase this, you know, it's just getting washed out. Kind of like when you don't understand yet lighting, let's say Photoshop or in video editing, you want to brighten the dark area. You don't understand there's highlights, midtones, and shadows. And what you do is you just crank up brightness all over the place. So what's already bright gets brighter, not just the shadowed area. That's basically what's happening, okay? All right, you see it? That's the only reason why you could see stuff in Eevee when there's no light, because the background's not set to black. Let's set it to black. Let's look at reality, okay? So this is an Eevee. Let's switch back to cycles. Look at cycles. It's bouncing it correctly, even when the world is pure black. All right, you guys see the difference, okay? But why not just use cycles? Why you even bother with Eevee? Eevee is quite new, 2.8, okay? Because sometimes in Eevee, it takes about 1 second to render the exact same setup. And then in cycles, it might take 10 minutes. All this light bouncing, ray tracing, photons bouncing, there's a price to pay. 1 second versus 10 minutes. 1 minute versus 10 hours, depending on your computer, okay? We've rendered stuff before on that iMac that I bring here that's kind of decent still. One frame takes about 24 hours. So just imagine that. If we're only using one computer and you're rendering a month, you barely get 1.2 seconds rendered in 1 month worth of animation. Okay? So factor that in. 1 year, you're just using that computer, you get what? 14 seconds? Collectively, 14 seconds it takes you to render in 1 year using just that one computer. So how do they do it? For those Hollywood movies, right? So before the advent of GPU rendering, they have what you call render farms. So they would actually have a setup where there's a bunch of CPUs, boxes basically, controlled by one monitor, and all they do is concentrate fire. It makes sense, right? If it takes 24 hours to render one frame using one computer, if you do that in what? 24 computers, then your render would go down to 1 hour instead of 24 hours because you have 24 computers concentrate firing. All right? If you use 48 computers, then you're down to half an hour. You get the math. We have 96 computers, so on and so forth. So you're really shrinking it down, okay? But in real animation, though, we don't really render like this. I'll render this image, okay? You don't really render the entire thing in one pass like this. You render it in multiple passes because all animation, they get a compositing treatment, okay? So compositing simply means what they design After Effects for. Okay, After Effects is really for compositing, and then it just became kind of like a motion graphics tool. Okay, but its real job is really to put assets together before. I mean, that's its thing, and it still can do it in a great way as well. Okay, it's just that it's really not used for that. 90% of its purpose. You know what I mean? They use it for motion graphics and some animation. All right. So what it is that we render in passes, meaning we're going to have a diffuse pass or the color pass. We're going to render the shadow separately. We're going to render the reflection separately. Okay? So when you do that and then you're going to say, well, you're going to put all this together anyway after, so why bother? Well, that's the thing. Rendering is expensive. If the shadows are way, way too dark, you render them separately. Guess what? You can control the brightness of the shadow. You don't have to re-render the entire frame. And you can adjust the shadow in After Effects or any compositing program. Okay, does that make sense? So you ended up layering all this, right? We never, we do because all we need is one image. And then we try to fix everything in 3D so that you learn how to use it. But technically, you don't have to. Once you render something, you can take it to Photoshop and tweak it. But if you're rendering 24 frames per second, you don't want to be batch cooking those things in Photoshop. It doesn't make sense. You're going to process too many images. All right. So it's finally done. It took 1 minute and 48 to render this in cycles. Let's switch it to Eevee. There we go. Done. Okay. So 2 something seconds. So now you see the difference. So why not just use Eevee for, well, that's the thing. You just can't use Eevee for everything. It can look good, all right? And there's a plugin that can simulate that bouncing of light. However, this will be kind of like our standard now when it comes to using Eevee as our engine, right? Right here it says Eevee. It says render sample 64. And we're watching our viewport 16. So I can put this to 64 so that whatever gets rendered is exactly what we're seeing here. Why are we leaving it at 16? Well, again, it's performance. If your computer can handle 64, you put 64. What you see is what you get. Okay? So you're scaling it. All right? I mean, remember in our cycles, it's quite noisy, isn't it? You see this? Because the render is 128, we're only seeing 32. So each time I move this, all those artifacts, so if you want it to look like exactly like your render, you crank this up to 128. Our computers will not be happy with that. Okay, so that's why to get that really clean output, it took us 1:48 to produce. I mean, here you're probably thinking, hey, I could change that to 128. There we go. It's going to clean it up. And when I move the camera a bit, it then recalculates it each time you change it. It's still not gonna look as clean because we have to set up our viewport denoising and all that. All right, I'm gonna leave that back to 32. Okay, so let's go back to our Eevee. Here are the things that you need to turn on depending on what you're planning to do. Mandatory ambient occlusion is checked. So you're doing all this now for all your render. Okay, so ambient occlusion is checked. Bloom, you can control bloom. Okay, intensity and whatnot. Bloom gives you that kind of light bloom right there. You see it? Okay, I'm going to turn it off. It's quite not noticeable because our light is kind of far and whatnot. But if we backlight it, so bloom, and then you want screen space reflection. Remember, this flow right here has some, oh, not yet, 50% roughness right there. So it can be shiny, but it's not showing any shine in there because you have to turn on screen space reflection, okay? Once you do that, and then I have this thing a little bit more shiny, okay? I think you can see it. Can you see it? Let's make this black. There we go. All right. Screen space reflection. If I turn that off. All right. Okay. If we're using subsurface scattering, you can control that as well. Remember our Swiss cheese from last time? Did we record that? I think so. It's in the Boolean one, right? We went all the way. Is that on the? Can someone check that if on YouTube if I actually uploaded that with a Boolean or if I cut the video? I don't remember. All right, so there's other things too, like depth of field, which we'll cover. Okay, later on. This is how you set up your camera to have bokeh. Remember that Japanese term for blur? All the beginner photographer, they go ooh, goo goo gaga over that one. It's a nice feature though. Okay, so all right, so from now on, you need at least these three things checked: ambient occlusion, bloom, and then screen space reflections whenever you use Eevee. Okay, you don't have these options in cycles because in cycles those things are assumed to be there.
The cheat is there on the YouTube video.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Tiago. All right. Okay, so if we're using Eevee, and which, probably what we're going to use, it's great, okay, once we turn this on now. All right, and again, I changed the background to pure black, all right, so keep that in mind. You're not going to get your bounce light. So how do you get bounce light here without downloading the add-on? Well, that's when you need what? Other lights, okay? Because it's like a fake world. It doesn't, in Eevee, light doesn't bounce, okay? So you can't expect to see your lighting is not one-to-one. In cycles, it's one-to-one in the real world, okay? Here, you're going to have to set up, let's say, another light. Okay, I'm going to select that light. I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to move it down here, kind of at the back, all right? So I get some light bouncing. There's that bloom, by the way. Now you see the bloom. Then turn off the bloom. There it is. And then you can power down this light. It's 1,000 watts. Keep that in mind too. The lighting wattage in cycles and Eevee, it's not one-to-one. You might need to tone down the wattage in cycles. It's much harsher in there. Okay, so I'm going to go here at, let's say 200. Okay, just enough to kind of get some bounce light and whatnot. You can, okay, and then you can change its radius. Okay, so it will do a little bit of coverage. Maybe crank it up a bit. There we go. All right, so you just want kind of like some bounce light or rim lighting it and whatnot. Okay. All right, so that's Eevee. And what else can we do here? Oh, bevel. We can introduce bevel. Okay, so we'll stop the recording right here for